You see that thing on the side of the road? It turns out it doesn't matter as much as you think. Check out this traffic stop in Coral Springs, Florida.
I stopped because you were just going 80. The speed limit here is 45.
We set speed limits, we put them on signs, and we expect people to follow them. But in reality, it plays out a little differently.
I'm giving you 2 citations for speeding and for careless driving.
People don't really drive based on what a sign tells them. 3 people in the US have been injured in a car crash just in the time that you've been watching this video. By the time you finish this video, 2 people will have died. And speed is one of the biggest factors. So cities across the nation are pushing for slower speed campaigns. But does lowering the speed limit actually change how people drive? Or is there a better way? Before cars, roads took the path of least resistance, winding around trees, boulders, and other obstacles just because it was easier to build that way. And when people traveled those roads by horse, even if the rider was asleep, drunk, or just a terrible driver, the horse wasn't about to slam into a tree. It would instinctively follow the path and avoid hazards on its own.
You cannot get a DUI on a horse. Look it up! Look it up!
But when we replaced horses with high-speed machines, suddenly all those obstacles that horses had no problem avoiding became deadly for drivers. And people started crashing. A lot. The carnage sparked public outcry, government studies, and a search for solutions.
Our acquaintances freely refer to it as Murder Row.
The problem before you is urgent. More people had been killed in automobile accidents than had been killed in all the wars we had ever fought.
Which brings us here, to the General Motors Proving Ground in Milford, Michigan.
What happens when a front tire blows at 90 miles an hour? Let's find out.
This place was the testing site for some of the biggest auto safety breakthroughs, like crash test dummies and interstate guardrails. But it also inadvertently laid the foundations for one of the most problematic concepts in traffic safety: forgiving design. By the 1960s, traffic deaths were rising sharply.
You kill 60,000 people uselessly. American motorists kill that many every 2 years.
At GM's Proving Ground, engineer Kenneth Stonex kept seeing the same thing happen. When a driver ran a car off the road, whether from a blown tire or a moment of distraction, it always came to a stop within about 30 feet. That observation led to a big idea in road safety. What if we just kept those 30 feet completely clear? No trees, no signs, no fixed obstacles, just empty space and room to recover. That idea became known as the 30-foot clear zone and was soon adopted into national road design guidelines.
Why then don't we remove the hazards from the sides of the roads instead of trying to educate each person not to hit those poles?
The goal was simple.
Protect the vehicle that runs off the normal traveled surface. For whatever reason, the forgiving roadside provides a traversable area, free of solid obstructions that will allow a driver to recover control of the vehicle and stop or get back on the traveled way.
It wasn't just about roadside space, though. Lane widths got the same treatment. According to the 1954 Traffic Engineering Design Manual, hazardous conditions exist when roads are too narrow, so traffic engineers encouraged wider lanes. As a side note, if you look at the study that they cited, it didn't actually measure lane width or safety outcomes at all. Now, most of this was initially targeted at highways, but regulators didn't stop at highways. They brought this forgiving design concept into cities too.
An 8-lane miracle, wide as a city block.
And not 30 feet, but as much clear roadside as is practical. Even in today's official traffic engineering manual, we see under urban environments priority given to remove fixed objects near the roadside, like trees, bushes, or poles, and that in cities, the most hazardous roadside crashes occur when vehicles operate at higher speeds. And so, the designer should strive for a wider lateral offset. That's basically a wider road so that people speeding in cities have more space to speed and then crash. Forgiving design, wider lanes, recovery areas, clear zones, gradual curves, and the flattening of hills became embedded in our psyche.
Spacious roads of divided lanes where free-flowing traffic can save time as well as lives.
Anything near the roadside became a threat, to the point fact that some departments of transportation didn't call trees trees. Instead, they became FHOs, fixed and hazardous objects.
Trees, stray boulders, you'll see these booby traps and others as well.
Through the eyes of a traffic engineer, hazards lurked everywhere, and creating wider, straighter, unobstructed roads would save lives at high speeds.
Widening out congested intersections, rounding square corners for the wheels of the automotive age.
So work began on transforming the roadways across America, and almost immediately, things began to change for drivers everywhere. Say you're driving on an open highway. You can see for miles, the road is straight, the lanes are wide, there's nothing around, no trees, no cars, no fixed hazardous objects, just the open road. Do you feel comfortable changing the radio station, glancing at your phone, eating a taco? For most people, this seems low risk, and when something feels safe, you push the limits. Compare that to driving through a busy elementary school parking lot at pickup time. Would you dare text while driving there? Speed? Probably not. The environment feels risky and is risky due to the complex and chaotic nature of your surroundings, so you automatically slow down and pay attention. Slowing down is the natural response for drivers perceiving an increased level of risk. Your perception of risk is all based on how the environment feels, on the vibes. So when engineers redesigned roads to be more forgiving, smoothing out curves, widening lanes, clearing the space around them, all to reduce the consequences of a mistake, they didn't realize something else would happen. By making roads feel safer, they actually encouraged drivers to drive more recklessly. This is called the Peltzman Effect. It's this aspect of human nature. When things feel safer, we often compensate by taking more risks. The problem isn't forgiving design per se. We should try to make mistakes less lethal. The problem is the way that we did it. The way we did forgiving design was also disarming design. We hid the real risks of driving.
The safety measures adopted have created road environments that are more forgiving of heedless driving.
When we have roads with wide lanes and clear zones, we're signaling to drivers that it'll be okay if they make a mistake or slip up. But in doing so, we tempt them into driving faster and paying less attention than they otherwise would.
Driving is a full-time job.
As road design becomes increasingly disarming, urban and suburban areas saw a troubling rise in reckless driving behavior. So much so that insurance companies were begging people to slow down.
Slow down for safety. Stop saving seconds and losing lives.
And how did transportation agencies respond? They attempted to slow down drivers by reducing speed limits and adding more signs, trying to reverse the unintended consequences of their own safer seeming designs. So that was the plan. Make it safer to drive with forgiving design, accidentally motivate people to drive more recklessly, and then politely ask them not to drive so dangerously by posting speed limit signs everywhere. And if this plan worked, 13,000 lives could be saved every year. At 20 miles an hour, if a pedestrian gets hit by a car, there's a 5% chance they won't survive. That's about 1 in 20. But raise the speed to just 30 miles an hour, and the death rate jumps to 45%. Nearly half, 9 out of 20 people, would die. At 40 miles an hour, the death rate jumps to 85%. That's 17 out of 20 people. To be clear, that's not the injury rate, that's the death rate. And as our cars get bigger and heavier, these pedestrian fatality numbers have gotten worse. So it makes sense that as a society, if we want to save lives, we'd want drivers in cities to slow down. And so cities across the country have enacted more stringent speeding limits. Portland launched a major campaign to lower residential speed limits to 20 miles an hour, handing out 7,000 yard signs declaring 20 is plenty. But after all of that effort, average speeds dropped by only 1%, only a quarter mile per hour slower. Clearly, signs alone weren't cutting it. Other studies show that for every 5 mile an hour decrease in the speed limit, actual speeds dropped by only about 1 to 2 miles an hour. Even the Federal Highway Administration admits most drivers at the study sites did not make major alterations in their speed after new speed limits were posted. They admitted that in 1997, by the way. That was nearly 30 years ago. So we've known for a long time that speed limits aren't effective. Why aren't they effective? Well, same reason we discussed before. It comes down to how we perceive risk while driving. Take a look at this road. It would probably feel agonizing to drive 20 miles an hour on a road that looks like this. Your internal cues are telling you it's safe to go one speed, while an external cue, like a sign, might say something different. Do you trust your eyes or that sign more? Road design shapes your behavior far more effectively than any sign can. Real speed limits aren't determined by signage on the side of the road, but by how close trees are, the width of the road, and other obstacles. Now take a look at these two roads. Which one would you probably drive faster on? They're both 20-mile-per-hour zones, but that top one has a lot more clear space. It sure would feel a lot better driving fast down that street. And as a result of designing our roads like that top picture, pedestrians are 4 times as likely to die on a spacious suburban neighborhood street than on the narrow streets of traditional neighborhoods. This study took a look at the speeds people go depending on the width of the road, and no surprise, wider roads meant faster speeds. The key takeaway from studies like this is that drivers intuitively match their speed to road design, not to posted speed limits. When roads are wide, clear, and feel forgiving, signs become kind of irrelevant. So if speed limit signs don't actually slow drivers down, and we know that high speeds are deadly, what's the solution? For streets to be truly safe, they need to communicate the real risk to the driver. If someone is driving in a way that's unsafe, they should feel uncomfortable doing it. John Adams, in the book Risk, describes one extreme way to make that happen.
If all motor vehicles were to be fitted with long, sharp spikes emerging from the centers of their steering wheels, the disparities in vulnerability and lethality between cyclists and drivers would be greatly reduced. Motorists driving with a heightened awareness of their own vulnerability would drive in a way that also benefited cyclists and pedestrians.
Okay, so one way to solve the problem is ensure that the threat of horrifically painful death is present in a driver's mind at all times. Makes driving sound kind of fun, right? Urban planner Ben Hamilton Bailey had a slightly different take. He asked,
what if seatbelts automatically unhooked and airbags shut off once the motor vehicle entered an urban space?
Okay, so maybe we don't need knives on steering wheels or ejector seatbelts or pedestrians to wave bricks when crossing the street or giant spiked gates. There are other ways to make drivers naturally slow down. If wider, straight roads encourage speeding, then the opposite should help slow people down and save lives. Instead of widening lanes, we should narrow them. Instead of smoothing out curves, we should tighten them. Instead of clearing the roadside, we should add back those fixed hazardous objects. Trees. Many cities have started implementing physical measures, speed bumps, narrower lanes, curb extensions, or bump outs to naturally slow drivers down. And the good news is that these designs actually work. Here's a look at how different traffic calming designs slow down drivers. Roundabouts lowered speeds by 7 miles an hour, humps 8 miles an hour, lumps 9 miles an hour, mini circles 4 miles an hour, narrowings 3 miles an hour. And those reduced speeds save lives. But not everyone is thrilled about traffic calming designs.
What do you think about the concrete balls?
They're dumb.
They are very dangerous.
People often complain about changes that make driving less convenient. We're used to roads that allow fast, easy driving, and anything else feels frustrating. So let's get to the 4 main objections to these changes. We'll hear the first objection from this Chesterfield, Missouri resident.
It was kind of confusing what they're planning on doing. It looked kind of dangerous to me. It's going to do some damage to your vehicle.
Objection number 1, they're more dangerous. You may think you're slowing down cars, but you're actually leading to more accidents. Yes, you might see tire tracks on medians or bump outs and assume that more accidents are happening. And maybe that's true, but here's the key difference. A dented fender is not the same as a trip to the hospital. Not all crashes are the same. That's the entire philosophy behind Vision Zero, the road safety movement that's being adopted in cities worldwide. The goal isn't to eliminate all crashes. That's probably impossible. The goal is to make crashes less consequential. This news report highlighted the scrapes as evidence of failure.
Just look at this one right here where a car has slammed right into it.
Yeah, That's the point. If someone messes up, they hit a curb, a post, a bump out, not a pedestrian. They called the tow truck, not an ambulance. Vancouver installed these slow street barricades, and of course, somebody hit them. And this person tweeted, "This is the second incident I've seen caused by these useless slow street barricades. They don't slow down traffic. They cause crashes and traffic chaos." I mean, it kind of looks like it did slow down traffic. That driver was probably distracted, not looking at the road when this happened, driving fast enough to skid that far down the barricade. But it's certainly better that they hit that than a person. So yes, maybe the number of incidences increases slightly, but they're generally at slower speeds and they involve vehicles hitting curbs, not life-threatening crashes. This is forgiving design done right. It doesn't eliminate mistakes, it reshapes the environment so that mistakes don't cost lives. By making driving more challenging in populated areas, we can bring the actual risk in line with the perceived risk. Driving in a dense city full of people should be difficult. Okay, objection number 2. Just use the police. You don't need road design if you have enforcement. Some people argue that instead of changing road design, we should just have more police enforcement, pulling over speeders, writing tickets. But there's a problem. Police are expensive, like really expensive. If we wanted to use enforcement to achieve the same speed reduction as road design, we'd need officers stationed every single day at multiple points along the road. The average citation takes up between 23 to 27 minutes of an officer's time, not including time lost in the court system. And that takes them away from other really valuable activities. And even when police are present, their impact is temporary at best. Let's look at some numbers. A study found that when a stationary marked police car was visible on a highway, drivers did slow down, as much as 5 miles an hour. But the second they passed the cop car, they sped right back up, going their original speed or even higher. The study checked driver behavior 1, 2, and 3 hours later and found no change in speeds. That means that unless you're going to park police officers on every road 24/7 forever, enforcement won't slow drivers down in any meaningful way. People don't slow down because they understand the risk of a crash. They slow down because they don't want a ticket. You could also install speed cameras, but you'd have to put them nearly everywhere. The second that threat is gone, people go right back to driving how they were before. I'll compare that to design-based solutions. Narrower lanes, tighter curves, these slow drivers down all the time, not just when they think they're being watched. Speed bumps in the UK are literally called sleeping policemen. They do the work of a police officer, but around the clock. Design is consistent, it's always there, and it works without needing enforcement. And here's the thing, if you hit a stationary object that's brightly colored that 1,000 people before you and after you have successfully avoided, then you were driving recklessly. And the normal, socially acceptable consequence of reckless driving is that you get a ticket for a few $100s. But instead, with these street designs, you do about the same amount in damage to your car by your own reckless driving. And you get a very embarrassing reminder of how dangerous driving can be. It's kind of like having a cop permanently stationed, but way more cost effective. Instead of relying on an endless game of speed trap whack-a-mole, we can actually fix the problem by making roads that naturally encourage safer speeds. Objection number 3. These changes are confusing and make driving more difficult. You know what? That's actually a good thing. A little confusion can actually increase safety. There's this thing called highway hypnosis that you might have experienced. It's that trance-like state you enter when you're driving on long, monotonous roads, like when you drive all the way home and you have no idea how you got there. This is the outcome of easy driving, of forgiving design. You stop paying attention. Some call road complexity confusing, but I'd call it attention grabbing. Let's take a look at Sweden. If you look at their crash data over the years, you'll see traffic deaths rise in the 1960s as car ownership increases. They decline in the 70s when seatbelts become standard, and then they level off in the 80s and then drop again when airbags are introduced. But wait, what happened in 1967? That year, traffic deaths plummeted by 17% overnight. It wasn't because of a new safety feature, it wasn't better enforcement or lower speed limits. It was because on September 3rd, 1967, Sweden switched from driving on the left side of the road to the right, and everyone had to relearn how to drive. Steering wheels were suddenly on the wrong side of the car, signs and signals had to be flipped. Experts predicted chaos.
greatest upheaval in Sweden's history.
But here's what actually happened. Because drivers were engaged, or maybe scared, they paid more attention. They slowed down. They were extra cautious. And the result? Fewer crashes and fewer deaths. It wasn't until 1970, 3 years later, that crashes crept back up to their previous levels. Now, obviously, switching driving sides every few years isn't a real solution, but it shows that a little bit of confusion can be a good thing. This is what a small town in France did to slow people down. They painted a ton of lines all over the place. Or you could do the opposite. Dutch traffic engineer Hans Monderman pioneered the concept of naked streets. Roadways stripped of all signage, including stop signs, signals, even lanes. And where this was done, crashes and injuries plummeted. In Wiltshire, UK, home to Stonehenge, they tested this theory by removing the center line from a busy street. And the result? Collisions dropped by 35%. Drivers gave oncoming cars 40% more space than they did on a striped road. London did a very similar thing on several roads and found that speeds dropped by 7 miles an hour. That's a huge margin and can cut the risk of death by nearly half. Because the missing center line made things feel uncertain, drivers had to actively pay attention to where they were in the lane instead of just assuming they had enough space.
I think we rather safe, yes. Well,
as Monderman put it, chaos equals cooperation. Monderman believed in his ideas so much that during interviews, he would insist on speaking in the middle of the street. He would even walk backwards into the flow of traffic, and every time the cars slowed down and moved around him. When drivers feel a little uncertainty, they naturally become more cautious and aware. But I will say there is a catch. Too much confusion can actually backfire. Not everyone is as confident as Monderman or as fearless as a seasoned cyclist. When roads feel too uncertain, it can actually discourage people from walking or biking altogether. So the key isn't just adding chaos. We want streets that make drivers think, not streets that make pedestrians wary. Objection number 4. These changes make it take too much time to get places. Okay, let's talk about the time cost of safety. And we should be clear about the trade-off. Yes, higher speeds mean shorter travel times, slower speeds mean longer travel times. But would you rather have a downtown that you can get to fast or one that's worth arriving at? And the time savings from driving fast are actually wildly overestimated. Have you ever driven faster to try to drop the time estimate on Google Maps? How much time did you actually save by speeding? 1 minute, maybe 2? Speeding in a city doesn't actually change our arrival times by much.
The effects of speed in reducing travel time are generally overestimated by road users, and at least in urban areas, the time savings are often small or negligible because of intersections and delays at traffic lights.
Let's put this into perspective. Here are two 15-mile commutes. In one scenario, the driver enters a city at 45 miles an hour and continues at that speed until they reach work. In the second scenario, the driver approaches a city at 45 miles an hour but slows to 25 miles an hour once they enter the city. How much longer does that second trip take? 48 seconds. That's it, less than a minute. Here's another way to look at it. For 25 years, New York City's Queens Boulevard was known as the Boulevard of Death. Someone was killed every 7 weeks. In 2015, the city spent $4 million to add pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. The result? By 2017, speeds dropped by 4 miles an hour. The city has continued to make upgrades with even more planned, but the death rate has already plummeted by nearly 70%. That's even with far more people walking and biking there. So, is a slight delay worth even one life? Most people, when given the choice, are willing to trade a few seconds for a place that's safer, more vibrant, and more welcoming. We do need to make it clear that there is a choice. There is a trade-off between time and safety. But the time trade-off is almost always marginal, and most people have shown themselves willing to spare a minute or two for the good of their city and their fellow citizens. So, do speed limits matter? A little, but will they fix the problem? No. We've seen how speed limits are ignored, how forgiving design encourages reckless driving, and how people instinctively match their speed to road designs. And yet, even with decades of research showing that road design influences driver behavior, most official solutions still focus on not road design. The National Transportation Safety Board's recent speed report lays out 5 strategies to reduce speeding-related crashes. They cite things like lower speed limits. Despite the Federal Highway Administration admitting nearly 30 years ago that speed limits don't have much of an effect. They also cite data-driven enforcement. Not a single one of their recommendations is road design. They say nothing about changing the roads, the one thing that actually changes how people drive. Even the current traffic engineering manuals still say that in urban environments, we need to design roads for people who speed by making them wider and more forgiving. We've spent decades designing roads that forgive driver mistakes by making them feel safer at high speeds. We know it's not working, as pedestrian deaths have surged nearly 50% in the last decade. So let's design roads that don't need speed limits because they self-explain the correct speed. We don't need more road signs. We need better road designs. Okay, so I'm at my local Target and I found the perfect thing to demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to signs. Check out this sign. It says, hey, don't push your shopping cart down the escalator because that's a terrible idea. How effective is the sign? Clearly not effective at all, because they also had to install these bollards to stop people from doing it anyway. And now that the bollards are here, what's the point of the sign? It's the same way with the roads. When we design roads the right way, it does way more than a sign could do to stop dangerous behavior.